Please note the correct identification of the men shown later in the movie.
Courtesy of the Wisconsin Electric Company is the last run of the first commercially successful electric streetcar in the United States. This was the April 6, 1930 run of the Appleton streetcar. This is the front of the building down in the flats where we've been having the Outagamie Museum. This is how the building looked in 1930. Get to see some of the old guard, as they were called. These were men who worked with the company, worked with the streetcar. Mr. Stark on the right. Next, Herman Close Sr., Mr. McGillen, Mr. Mensiger, a couple of the local dignitaries of 1930, Police Chief Prim and A.K. Ellis. Police Chief Prim can be seen everywhere. He's the taller of these men with the white beard. He was especially impressive riding his horse. A.K. Ellis, the shorter man, was the head of the power company which ran the streetcar. And we're going through the Appleton Flats heading north. This is the old Lower Oneida Street. Over on our right will be the buildings associated with Appleton Woolen Mills and the knitting works. This is the main channel of the Fox River, and notice the streetcar has its own bridge right next to the automobile bridge. Fox River Paper Company buildings coming up ahead were from the 1880s, gave Appleton the nickname the Lowell of the West because they looked so much like Lowell, Massachusetts. Here's the old Pearl Street Hill, as it was originally called, later the Oneida Street Hill. The streetcar was having a lot of fun going up there. The old Smith livery is on the left, the Congregational Church on the right. Here's going east on College Avenue. That's the old Volksfreund building, the taller building on the left-hand corner that we're just coming up to. Over on the right, the tall building with the spire was the original Presbyterian Church from 1879. It was the first building that the rather famous architect Charles Hove designed for Appleton. It made his reputation in the community. Over on the left, the front of the Episcopal Church, which is still standing. The Presbyterian Church has not. Passing the Lawrence campus now. Main Hall is over on the right. You can't quite see it in this picture. On the left, you'll see some little store buildings, those frame buildings. They were there originally. There was a whole row of little commercial buildings where Lawrence Chapel is now. The chapel, of course, was set back from the road, and some of the stores stayed there until, obviously, 1930. Residential district on East College Avenue. This was one of Appleton's most quiet, peaceful, and desirable neighborhoods until 1960 when the College Avenue Bridge was put through. Heading north on Rankin now, this was the Appleton City streetcar, not the interurban, which had its own line. This streetcar ran basically from Riverside Cemetery to Prospect Avenue in the Appleton Junction area. Trees everywhere. Some of these homes are still standing. Coming up to the Pacific Street corner. Heading over in just a moment, you'll see the Pacific Street Bridge, which will be torn down shortly. Here we are. The original Pacific Street Bridge was wooden with many slats and side supports. It was a more open type of bridge. This is the present bridge, which is now slated for replacement. Some of the old Harriman family homes are still in the area, but there's the greenhouse that many people go to, Riverside Greenhouse, with the front entrance of the cemetery right next to it, or right behind it. That's the end of the line on the east side of town. Now the car is going to whop over to the west side of town, show off a little more of Appleton. Here's the interior view of the car. People with dentures must have had a problem on this run. And obviously the track was a little bumpy. There's a silent movie camera mounted right inside the car. Going back on College Avenue, now we're heading west on College. Notice the type of street light that was used in the 30s. This was an electric light. And here's one of the turnouts so that the cars could pass at the main intersections. And heading down into the covered ravine. There had been a ravine originally running from the river and the Jones Park area all the way up to Atlantic Street, more than a mile through the city. There were originally bridges at Lawrence Street and College Avenue over the ravine, but this period, the 1930s, it had all been filled in, so we just have a dip in the area of the Viking Theater. Heading down State Street, there was a fire department right in this neighborhood, as well as St. Mary's Church and School, which are still there. The St. Mary's Church will be coming up on the left. I think we just caught a little glimpse of the fire department building there. Now we're turning onto Prospect Avenue from State Street, Memorial Drive Bridge, and Hearthstone on the left. This is the first home with electric light in America. Continuing on Prospect Avenue, many of these homes are still there and many are in excellent repair. This is still a fine residential area near Pierce Park. All the property in this area was originally part of the land owned by Humphrey Pierce. That's how Pierce Park got its name. We're chugging along past the park over to Mason Street. The city car made a run from Mason up to College Avenue and back. And here you'll see one of the few situations where the railroad had to make way for the streetcar. The streetcar line was there before the railroad bridge was put in, so the railroad bridge had its center post off-center. Coming back down Mason Street. You can tell by the pace of the people and the traffic that the streetcar was not a big threat. Apparently, you got out of the way at your leisure, and the car was supposed to slow down for you. It was not considered fair to run down potential passengers. At this period, there were some interesting races between cars and buses, though. In some cases, the city buses would follow the same route as the streetcar, and the bus would jump ahead a few blocks and try to snag passengers. There's the corner of Prospect and Mason Street looking to the south, and they're going to turn now on Prospect again, go back toward the downtown. There's the edge of Pierce Park over on the right. The Dance Every Sunday Night placard that you see on the streetcar ahead is probably an advertisement for the Riverside Ballroom. In the early days, around the turn of the century, the streetcars all developed their own parks. The transit authorities had their own parks and recreational areas and would make streetcar runs to them. That street construction is still underway, I believe. Those barricades look familiar. Over on the left, back on College Avenue, you'll see the Aid Association for Lutherans looking much shorter. It didn't have its full complement of stories at this point. That was a little bit of the bumpy ride coming up that incline as well from where the old ravine had been. You can see the spire of the Presbyterian Church way down in the distance. That was quite an Appleton landmark, which has now disappeared. And here's going back down alongside the old Congregational Church site, down the Pearl Street Hill or Oneida Street Hill. The building over on the right, the smaller building there, is now the headquarters for Art Fair, the new name for Tuttle Press. And we pass between these charming New England factory-style buildings, Fox River Paper, which are now owned partly by Fox River, but William House has also come into the picture. There's the Knitting Works up ahead. A little farther over to the left was Appleton Woolen Mill. And we're almost back down to the car barn. It's down at the end of the street on the right. Way at the far end of the street, you can see the between the locks, the original Appleton Brewery. And A.K. Ellis, the head of the power company, and Police Chief Prim, nod and beam at the end of the run of the last. Well, back again, and I'd like to, on behalf of humanity, thank the people who saved these films. Isn't it great that someone cared enough to take the pictures and then hold on to them? That's rather unusual with movies, in our area at least. If you have films, if you have old home movies, not necessarily this old, perhaps you have picnic films or family reunion films or something like that, before they deteriorate or before you throw them away, think about it. Perhaps some of the scenes could be saved and are of enough general interest so that they could be kept at the Historical Society.
Please note in this photo the correct identification of people later incorrectly identified in the movie.
The Appleton Heritage Society invites you to ride dual tracks in time. One is the last city streetcar ride in Appleton on April 6, 1930. The second is covering the same route as closely as possible in April 1998, the Wisconsin sesquicentennial year. We are at the car barn in the Flats in April 1930. 4 old-timers associated with the streetcars are here: John Stark, Wisconsin-Michigan employee; Herman Close, driver; Robert McGillen, conductor; and George Mensinger, Wisconsin-Michigan employee. The event was observed by Police Chief George Prim, man with the beard, and Elbert Ellis, Vice President and Manager of the Wisconsin-Michigan Power Company. From the barn, we proceed through the Flats, past Appleton Woolen Mills and towards the Oneida Street Bridge. At that point, the streetcar tracks enter their own extended bridge. We approach and pass the Fox River Paper company buildings. Up the hill, we pass the Congregational Church, a fine Richardson Romanesque building. In 1998, we start at the Edison Center, near the site of the old car barn. On Old Oneida Street, the black building on the right is Valmet Industries. On the left is the Trolley Car 86, where a group is rebuilding streetcars for historic use. On the Old Oneida Street Bridge, we notice that the track bridge is gone. The paper mill has been transformed into the historic Fox River Mill apartments and condos. We proceed up the hill, past the Lawrence University Arts Academy, and then must turn back, for the road ends. Overhead, we see the new Oneida Street Bridge. The Congregational Church is gone, replaced by a new structure on South River Street. Back on the trolley, we turn east on College off Oneida. We can see the spire of the Presbyterian Church in the distance. We roll past the Majestic Theater, Woolworth's, Geenan's Department Store, Heckert's Shoes, Shannon's, the Armory, the Presbyterian Church, and Masonic Temple. Next, All Saints Episcopal Church and the Lawrence College campus. The small stores near the chapel included Tra's store, beloved of the students for its chocolate donuts. The residential area beyond the campus was a quiet backwater. We will pass the homes of George Prim, the Galpins, Gocknauers, Zelkes, and Marstons, finally turning north on Rankin. All Saints Church still stands in Grace, but the Presbyterian Church is gone. The Masonic Temple has become the Outagamie County Historical Society. Lawrence campus begins, and we see the library and Kohler Hall. Some of the gracious old houses past the campus are now owned by Lawrence, such as Wilson House, admissions, and Scarf House for visiting scholars. Thus, the end of College Avenue is no longer a quiet backwater, for the bridge was built in 1960, destroying that ambiance. The trolley proceeds up Rankin, passing the homes of Joseph Griffith, professor of psychology at Lawrence, Schlafer of Schlafer Hardware, the Hellers, Buxtons, and Ogilvies. Back to the 90s, we find we cannot turn off on Rankin off College, so we go up Meade, over on Washington, and then Rankin. The area has not changed much. though like the college, most of the elms are gone, destroyed by the Dutch elm disease in the 50s and 60s. The tracks take us east of Pacific, passing the Catlins, Morgans, and Johnsons. We cross the old Pacific Street Bridge over Bel Air Park. At the curve, we see attorney Fred Harriman's house. Then ahead, Riverside Greenhouse, the chapel and gateway of Riverside Cemetery, which was designed by H.H. Waterman. It is the end of the line. This Riverside Cemetery and St. Joseph's are also the end of the line for many pioneers and old families of Appleton. The connection on the lines are reversed, the seats are switched, and we return to College via Rankin. Today, Pacific Street looks peaceful as we proceed over the new Pacific Street Bridge. The park below is now called Peabody Park, after a legacy from George F. Peabody, which became available in the 50s. The Harriman House is still there, as are the Riverside Greenhouse and the Riverside Cemetery. Gladys Tabor, who wrote of her girlhood in Appleton, mentions both places, and as well as downriver, the courting path along the Fox below the cemetery. Back in the 30s, we proceed along College Avenue, passing 2 drugstores, Voight's and Bellings, 3 grocery stores, including an A&P, the Elm Tree Bakery, Treasure House, Peerless Laundry, and other businesses. West of Oneida, we spot Conkey's, Schlafer Hardware, Kresge's, Pettibone Peabody's, the Elite Theater, and Glaudeman's Department Store. The dip is a partially filled-in ravine that originally stretched from the river to Pacific Street. Ahead we see the new Zilke building from 1930, the enlarged AAL building, and then on the site of Pettibone Peabody's, the City Hall. After All Saints, we reach the commercial area and find Conkey's now on the north side of College Avenue. The south side is rich in prairie-style buildings, as well as 19th century buildings by architects William Waters and Charles Hove. West of Oneida, after the Tudor Revival Zilke building, is a group of other 19th century buildings, including a Hove and a Walters, and with decorated touches such as Lion's Head and Flemish steps. Then there is the Art Deco Gibson building, also from the 30s. The Paper Valley Hotel of the 80s stretches for several blocks. The dip is still there, but filled in even more. On tracks again, we turn south on State Street, passing the drugstore from the 1920s, a brick building with terracotta ornaments, St. Mary's Church and School, and the residences of the Van Rysens, Quillens, Mortels, Wickmans, Glaubemans, St. Clair's, and Garveys. Now, when we turn on State Street, the drugstore is still there, as well as a cluster of insurance companies. St. Mary's School and Church are also there, as well as the handsome restored grout home of the late Frank Council. Tracking again, we turn west at Prospect, viewing the Memorial Drive Bridge and the Alfred Priest residence. We proceed past the homes of the O'Keeffes, Charlie Pond of Pond Sports Store, Walter Zwicker of the Zwicker Knitting Mills, Van Roy's, and Haberman's. We run along the edge of Pierce Park until Mason. Off track, we turn on Prospect and find the Memorial Drive Bridge still there, but more difficult to spot because of trees. The Priest House is now known as Hearthstone. Most of the homes are still well taken care of, and Pierce Park still welcomes summer band concerts. However, something has been added on the southeast corner of Prospect and Mason, Jefferson School. The trolley has reached Mason and we turn north heading for College Avenue. We pass under the Chicago and Northwestern Railway Bridge with its off-center support which accommodates our tracks. Near St. Matthew's Evangelical Lutheran Church, we reverse and head back on Mason. Heading north on Mason today, we find the railway bridge still there, now used by Wisconsin Central. There is now a school connected with St. Matthew's. We ride our private track across the river, proceed into the flats, and enter the car barn, once more observed by Chief Prim and Mr. Ellis. We have participated in the end of an era of streetcars in Appleton that began in 1886. The Appleton Heritage Society wishes to thank Wisconsin Electric Company for preserving the historic film of the last trolley ride and for permission to use it during the Wisconsin Sesquicentennial celebration on May 16, 1998.